Today we'll be working in my workbook called Saul and Peter Preach to the Gentiles, and we will be doing the last chapter of this book, Herod versus Peter, Acts 12, 1 through 25. And the best way to review is to kind of look at the timeline. We started in 34 AD with Saul. Well, this is actually just before the story where he is arresting everybody that's in Christians, and so they get scattered to the various places. And then Philip also goes to meets the Ethiopian eunuch and converts him to Christianity. Then in 35 AD, Saul is converted on the road to Damascus, which is probably where our book starts. Maybe it started earlier. Anyway. And then he spends several days in Damascus, and then he leaves for Arabia, which we only understand from Galatians. We don't see it in the book of Acts. And so he continues to preach, and he escapes finally to Jerusalem because most people are not accepting that he is converted to Christianity. And then Barnabas protects him in the fact that he introduces him to the apostles, which helps him helps the apostles accept Saul. He stays with Peter for a number of days, and then he finally flees to Tarsus when the Jews were going to be after him. Then we see him preaching in Syria for about 5 years. Again, that's from the book of Galatians, not from Acts. And we see a time with Peter where he travels and he heals Ananias and Tabitha. And then he finally is called to Caesarea by Cornelius, and it heals him, brings him to the Christian faith along with his household. And then about 40 AD, that's crossed over here, Peter is then having to defend the fact that he preached and converted a Gentile. And we also see missionaries from Cyrene and coming to Antioch. So that's about where we are. Right about in 42 AD. So actually we talked about Agabus too, so maybe it's even farther. So we talked about him. But anyway, so we're in the last chapter of this book. As soon as I find it. Herod versus Peter, Acts 12, 1 through 25.
Acts 12, 1. Now about that time, Herod the king stretched out his hand to harass some from the church. Then he killed James, the brother of John, with a sword.
This Herod is Herod Agrippa I. We will talk about his family on the next page. Herod Agrippa is actually half Jewish from his mother's side. Herod Agrippa I was very interested in Jewish customs and daily offered a sacrifice according to Jewish law. He loved living in Jerusalem and curried the favor of the Jews. He began to persecute the Christians in Jerusalem to satisfy the Jews. So who was Herod Agrippa I harassing?
Some of the church.
The Christian church, yeah. And who did he have killed?
James.
Yeah, this is now the second martyr of the Christian faith. I mean, others were killed, but the ones that we know, Stephen being first, and James is the first apostle that dies, which threw everybody in a little bit of a tizzy because the apostles were supposed to stay forever kind of thing, and yet the first apostle dies really early in the church history. But this also helps us understand who wrote the book of James. It was not the apostle James. It's the apostle, this brother of Jesus. This man he had killed was the brother to whom?
John.
So this means James, one of the apostles, was killed. This would have rattled the church as the disciples would have felt that God protected the apostles from all harm. James would have been guilty of leading people to false gods according to Jewish law. So beheading, as this was, would have been just punishment. Why would Herod Agrippa have decided this was a good thing to do?
He believed he would win the favor of the Jews.
Mm-hmm. Why would James' death have devastated the early Christians?
because he was one of the first apostles of Jesus.
Right. Why was James killed with a sword or beheaded?
It was the punishment for leading people to false gods.
Yeah, it would have been really a devastation to the church to have one of the apostles die. That was major. And of course, he was part of the early three too, Peter, James, and John, so it was a major blow. So this is a side story of who Herod the Great and his family were the royal line that ruled over Israel during the New Testament. What was their part of Christian history? Herod the Great, he was the king at the birth of Jesus. So he's the one that in Matthew 2 through 3:16, where is the one who had been born king of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and came to worship him. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When Herod realized he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years and older. So that's Herod the Great. Herod Antipas, he's the one that has John the Baptist killed. And Herod had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. For John had been saying to him, "It's not lawful for you to have her." The king was distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he ordered that her request be granted and had John beheaded in the prison. Then Herod Agrippa I is shown in our story here. Herod Agrippa II will listen to Paul's defense against the charges brought against him with his wife Bernice. That's kind of where I am right now in the writing. And so the next day, Herod Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp and circumstance. The audience room with the high-ranking military officers and prominent men of the city, all at the command of Festus. Paul was brought in. Bernice was his sister, but there is talk that they probably had an incestuous time. Herod Agrippa never got married. Bernice had 2 husbands and divorced both of them to stay the rest of the time with her brother.
Acts 12:3. And because he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to seize Peter also. Now it was during the days of unleavened bread. So when he had arrested him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 squads of soldiers to keep him, intending to bring him before the people after Passover.
So what did Herod see that pleased the Jews?
James' death was pleasing to the Jews.
Right. And who did he now seize?
Peter.
When did he put Peter in jail?
During the days of unleavened
bread. Yeah. Who did Herod deliver Peter to?
4 squads of soldiers.
So this would have been 1 soldier chained to each of his hands and 2 guarding the jail cell and then changing shift with another 4 every 6 hours. When did Herod intend to bring Peter before the people?
After the Passover.
So why do you think Herod waited until after the festival?
He didn't want to cause, he was worried that it would cause an uprising during the festival.
And why did Herod use so many soldiers to guard Peter?
Obviously because of how the other apostles had been freed in the past.
Yeah, and no soldiers are going to hold them if angels are going to release them. Yeah, and when you read this, at first you think it reminds you of when Pontius Pilate offered Jesus and Barabbas at Passover, but that was during Passover. That wasn't after Passover. So this is a entirely different type of thing.
Acts 12:5. Peter was therefore kept in prison but constant prayer was offered to God for him by the church. And when Herod was about to bring him out that night, Peter was sleeping, bound with 2 chains between 2 soldiers, and the guards before the door were keeping the prison.
So who were praying for Peter?
The church.
Mm-hmm. Realistically, no one can pray constantly for days on end. So how do you think the church made constant prayer for Peter?
I think they took turns.
Right.
I think they had so many that would be praying, and then when they would need a break, then they would have 2 more come in and pray.
Right. We've had some of those 24-hour vigils. I don't know if it was 9/11 or whatever, where our churches were open and you could, keep that going 24 hours. Not a bad
Yeah.
thing. Looking at the previous page, when was Herod going to bring him out again?
It was going to be after Passover.
And what time of day is this story presently at?
Um, Nighttime.
Mhm. Based on how the story is going to proceed, the soldiers guarding Peter were also asleep. Why do you think the writer, Luke, here just mentions Peter is sleeping?
To show, I think it was because he wanted to show that Peter was calm. He was at ease. He wasn't worried.
Right.
Peter 12, Acts 12:7. Now behold, an angel of the Lord stood by him, and a light shone in the prison. And he struck Peter on the side and raised him up, saying, Arise quickly. And his chains fell off his hands. Then the angel said to him, Gird yourself and tie on your sandals. And so he did. And he said to him, Put on your garment and follow me.
Right. Um, Peter rises quickly, and then gird yourself is basically they take their robe, because they wear a robe and tie it under between their legs so they can walk faster. The robe's not going to restrain them as far as walking. And that's what means gird yourself, is you bring the robe around and tie it. Jesus girded himself when he washed their feet, basically getting your robe out of the way, but also just tying it around so these things. It's just a way of handling the robe when you want it to be out of the way or be able to walk faster or whatever. But when Peter rose up, his chains immediately fell off his hands, and he said, tie on your sandals. Often they walked without sandals and stuff, but Peter wouldn't know what the angel was going to do. This meant that he's going to take him outside, of course. And so put on your garment. That's the outer garment. He wasn't sitting there naked or anything. Put on your outer garment and follow me. Not only an angel appeared, but what else shone into the prison?
A bright light.
Usually the prison was dark at night, but this light was probably done so that Peter could see his clothes and his way out of the prison. What fell off as soon as Peter stood up?
Chains.
What are the clothing requests the angel made of Peter? Go ahead and fill those three.
Gird yourself, tie on your sandals, put on your garment.
Why would the angel want Peter to be completely and properly clothed before leaving?
Because he was taking him from the prison.
Right. Right. And as I put here, gird can also just be putting on your belt, because of course, if they're relaxing and stuff, they might have loosened their belt or taken their belt off to relax. So it just kind of depended which way you wanted to interpret the girding. Were the soldiers awake during this?
No.
No. So we know now that all the soldiers were asleep as well, but he's chained to two soldiers. So there you go.
Acts 12:9. So he went out and followed him, and did not know that what was done by the angel was real, but thought he was seeing a vision. When they came past the first and the second guard posts, they came to the iron gate that leads to the city, which opened to them of its own accord. And they went out and went down one street, and immediately the angel departed from him.
Right. So Peter's basically thinking this is a dream.
Mm-hmm.
And so he does what the angel tells him to do, but he thinks it's a dream. And it isn't, and they pass by all these guard posts and everybody's asleep. And it's just kind of funny. I imagine that would felt really, really strange. And it wasn't until they got beyond it and beyond to a street that was beyond the prison that the angel finally figures, okay, Peter's on his own now. He can find the rest of the way himself. And then he leaves. What did Peter at first think was happening?
He was seeing a vision.
Right. Nothing says how Peter and the angel got through the first and second guard posts. Our picture here indicates the guards were sleeping. What other possible ways could they have gotten through?
He could be the angel hypnotized them, put them in some sort of trance.
Right.
They were cloaked. The angel cloaked them so that when they walked through, they were not seen.
Right. Any of those things are possible. We just assume they were sleeping, but being asleep at your post probably wasn't the right thing. So, how did the iron gate that led to the city open?
Of its own accord,
How far did the two travel after going through the iron gate?
down one street,
At that point, what happened to the angel?
he departed.
Why do you think the angel disappeared at this point and not when Peter got to his destination?
Because his job was done.
His job was done. Peter can find the rest of the way. Peter also needed to realize it wasn't a dream.
Yeah,
So, yeah. Why do you think where do you think Peter is going to go to?
I think he's going to either the place he was originally staying or possibly to where the disciples meet.
Right.
It's not what the turn for me. Hold on. Acts 12:11. And when Peter had come to himself, he said, now I know for certain that the Lord has sent his angel and has delivered me from the hand of Herod and from all the expectations of the Jewish people.
What did Peter originally think this event was again?
A vision.
When the angel disappeared, Peter knew three things for certain. Go ahead and fill those out.
The Lord sent his angel. The Lord delivered Peter from the hands of Herod, and the Lord delivered Peter from the expectations of the Jewish people.
The Jewish people wanted Peter, the head of the apostles, to be killed, just like, the head of any movement. If you kill him, people used to think that would kill the message, but others have begun to realize, and even during this time, realize that if you kill the martyr, it becomes bigger, not smaller.
Mhm.
This is not the only time that God will save the apostles from death. Saul writes in 2 Corinthians about his travels in Asia. 2 Corinthians 1, 8 through 11. We do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we experienced in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death. But this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God, who raises the dead. He has delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us again. On him we have set our hope that he will continue to deliver us as you help us by your prayers. What is the reason Saul states these sentences of death come to them during their evangelism?
I think it's because that it's not so they don't rely on themselves, but they keep their, I guess you would say, they keep their faith and rely on God and go by what God's will is for them.
Yeah, any gift that you have, if it's really used in God's hands, it will put you through times of trial. If you were a missionary, everything's not rosy, peachy keen where you're going as a missionary, or evangelist or a prophet. Any of these gifts, if you're very much into it, very strongly into it, you're going to get opposition. And I'm kind of talking to myself a little bit. But anyway, I begin to go, wait, I'm not at a point where I'm allowing opposition to happen. But anyway, so, you have to realize that, how in for God are you? Are you willing to face the opposition that will come? So,
All right, Acts 12:12. So when he had considered this, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together praying. And as Peter knocked at the door of the gate, a girl named Rhoda came to answer. When she recognized Peter's voice because of her gladness, she did not open the gate, but ran in and announced that Peter should stood before the gate. But they said to her, you are beside yourself. Yet she keep insisting that it was so. So they said, it is an angel.
it was his angel,
Yes, it is his angel.
right? So he comes not knowing where to go. He ends up going to the house of Mary, which is Mark's mother. And of course, Mark's mother and grandmother were Christian, and many were gathered there praying. And we know that they were praying for Peter, among other things. And so Rhoda In her excitement, hears Peter's voice. In her excitement, instead of opening the door, rushes to the others. And she must have been known as not really having it all together, because they said, well, it's just his angel, no big deal, whether they still believed in the fact that when you die, there's an angel wandering around, or if they were just saying, kind of hushing her up, going, okay, it's okay, you probably heard somebody, but it wasn't Peter, just comforting her. Could have been any of those things. It is his angel would mean that they would have thought he died at that point, because obviously his angel's not wandering around without, if he's still alive. So, we can, there's different ways that we could look at this. It depends on what they were thinking. What house did Peter go to?
Mary, mother of John.
Who's also named as Mark. Yeah, this is the same Mark that will later write the book of Mark. What were the people doing inside the house?
Praying.
And what do we know about this prayer stated in Acts 12:5?
It was constant.
Right, it was constant, and they were praying about Peter. It's funny, and I'm sure you've had this too. When you pray about something and there's an immediate response, you don't believe it.
Yeah.
Can't be that quick. Can't be that quick. Did Rhoda open the gate to Peter?
No.
Did the disciples believe that was Peter at the gate?
No.
Normally, prayer reaction to prayer takes forever. Occasionally, something happens right after prayer or right during prayer, and that freaks you out. It's like, whoa! But in this case, that's what happened. Their prayers were constant and in earnest, but they hadn't had the faith that what they prayed for would actually happen, which is often where we are too. I remember specifically when I prayed for Michael to be born, and then it actually happened. And I'm going, wait, who did the disciples believe was at the gate instead of Peter?
His angel.
Yeah, Jews believed in the idea of guardian angels, and it seems many felt the angels looked like the persons they were guarding. There's many ways of interpreting this, but that would be one way.
Acts 12:16. Now Peter continued knocking, and when they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. But motioning to them with his hand to keep silent, he declared to them how the Lord had brought him out of prison. And he said, go tell these things to James and to the brethren. And he departed and went to another place.
And obviously, this is James, the brother of Jesus, because James is not alive, but the brother of John. Did they finally let Peter into the house?
Yes.
Peter told them to keep silent so that he can tell them what happened. But what would be another reason to keep silent?
To not draw attention, because there was still guards out at night, so he didn't want the attention to be drawn to him.
Right. Who does Peter want told of these things?
James and the brethren.
James here is not the brother of John, since he's now dead, but the brother of Jesus and the writer of the book of James. As a brother of Jesus, James did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah until he rose from the dead. One of Jesus's resurrection appearances was specifically to see his brother James. When Saul came back to Jerusalem after his conversion, he meets with Peter and James, the brother to Jesus. Later in the book of Acts, James will be the vital member of the Jerusalem Council who decides which Jewish laws apply to Gentile believers. When recounting the story of the Jerusalem Council in Galatians 2:1-10, Saul describes Jesus as the pillar of the church, a man of high reputation. James becomes the head of the Jerusalem church. Why he was picked over anybody else, we don't have that story. But James is considered the head of the Jerusalem church, leaving Peter to do other things, I guess.
Mhm.
After Peter told them to tell James and the brethren, what did he do?
He went to another place. It didn't say where, but he just went to another place.
Yeah, we don't know where Peter went after this. We do know he was at the Jerusalem Council in 47 AD and ended up in Rome. So that we know, but we don't know where he went right now.
Acts 12:18. Then, as soon as it was day, there was no small stir among the soldiers about what had become of Peter. But when Herod had searched for him and not found him, he examined the guards and commanded that they should be put to death. And he went down from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there.
In this case, the angels don't, Peter and stuff don't save the soldiers. There's a couple other times when the soldiers are saved because they're only following orders. But in this case, that didn't happen. When did the soldiers find out that Peter was gone?
When at daytime.
Did Herod find Peter?
No, he didn't.
What did Herod command about the guards who were supposed to be guarding Peter?
They'd be put to death.
The rule was if a prisoner escaped, the soldier would get the same punishment as the prisoner would have got. Where did Herod go after he took care of the guards?
Caesarea.
And then draw a line so you know where it is. Yeah.
Acts 12:20. Now Herod had been very angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, but they became to him with one accord, and having made Blastus the king's personal aide their friend, they asked for peace because their country was supplied with food by the king's country.
Yeah, we don't know what Herod was angry about, but Herod was very capricious anyway. So why did Tyre and Sidon need to make peace with Herod Agrippa I?
Because Herod, his country was the ones that supplied them with food.
Right. And Herod being angry was not good for the country. Who
No,
did these countries become personal friends with?
Blastus, the king's personal friend.
Nothing is known about Blastus other than he was a personal aide to Herod. How do you think they made friends with Blastus?
They probably bribed him.
Probably. Okay, so probably Cyrene and Tyre are on the coast there, as you can see, and then make them a line down to Caesarea. Caesarea Philippi? Yeah, probably. And then do you think the people of Tyre and Sidon will try to flatter Herod to make him like them again?
Absolutely. They're
That's
going
what
to do
they
anything to keep from
Yeah.
starving.
Yeah, they'll do anything, yes.
Acts 12:21. So on a set day, Herod, arrayed in royal apparel, sat on his throne and gave an oration to them. And the people kept shouting, the voice of God and not of man. Then immediately an angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give glory to God. And he was eaten by worms and died. But the word of God grew and multiplied.
Right. So what did the people say in praise to Herod?
The voice of God and not man.
Right. They were praising him and saying, no, he's a god. He isn't just a man, he's a god. Did Herod stop them from making this statement?
No.
After all the things that Herod did that was wrong, it was finally this that finally God said, this is the end. This is it. This is the last straw. Who
Okay.
struck Herod?
An angel.
Right. An angel of the Lord. Yeah. What happened to Herod?
He was eaten by worms.
In this confrontation between Peter and Herod, who won?
Peter.
And we know the exact year of his death, of Herod Agrippa's death, is 44 AD. And that's what helps us is we can date some of these things to know when things happen.
Mm-hmm. Acts 12:25. And Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem to Antioch when they had fulfilled their ministry. And they also took with them John, whose surname was Mark.
Right. So John Mark, this was the house where Rhoda was there. They're now Saul and Barnabas are going back to Antioch, which would seem to be where Saul considers his home base now, even though Tarsus is his hometown. And they're going to start their ministry in the next book, of course. Why were Barnabas and Saul originally in Jerusalem?
To give the offering from Antioch.
Where did they go from Jerusalem?
Antioch.
And who else did they take with them to Antioch?
John, who's also known as Mark.
So we know a couple of things about John Mark. We know he's Barnabas's cousin, which Colossians 4:10 tells us, or we're running short on time, so I'm not going to read all these things. We know his mother was called Mary and that they had a house in Jerusalem where the disciples met for prayer, and that's shown in Acts 12:12. He's probably the young man who escaped naked when Jesus was arrested in Mark 14, 51, 52. And we know that because when people write about themselves, they always do it as third person. And he is the one that caused a sharp disagreement between Saul and Barnabas. And we see that in Acts 15, which turns out to be in favor of what God wanted, because then there became two groups who were evangelizing instead of one. And later he and Saul resolved their disagreement, which is in 1 Timothy 4:11. So now we get to the crossword. And so 2, what was the church doing constantly for Peter?
Praying.
And number 4, who was Herod's personal aide?
Blastus.
Number 5, who was the maid that heard Peter's voice at the door?
Rhoda.
And 6, Peter originally thought what was happening to him was a
Vision.
And 7, Peter told the disciples to tell these things to James and to the
Brethren.
11, the angel told Peter,
Gird
yourself and tie on your sandals. 13, after going through the iron gate, they went down one
street.
And 14, who did Herod Agrippa 1 have killed?
James.
1 down. The disciples originally thought it was not Peter, but his
angel.
And 2, Herod was not going to bring Peter before the people until this event.
Passover.
3, what time of day did the angel come?
Night.
8, about that time, Herod stretched out his hand to
harass
some of the church. 9, an angel of the Lord stood by Peter and a
light.
Shown in the prison. 10, what did Herod Agrippa 1 die of?
Worms.
And 12, who did Herod seize after James' death?
Peter.
Okay, so yeah, good story. Good. I like the book of Acts, and so I will